Hey there, it's Moons. So I've been seeing a lot of people running sun bracers, and I get it, it's infinite nades, it's a lot of fun. But looking at the builds, I just feel like it's not super viable in endgame content, and so I wanted to put together a build that would hold up in things like raids, master raids, grandmaster nightfalls, things like that. And so I thought I'd share with you what I've come up with. So the core of this build is about proccing damage buffs and healing buffs on command and maintaining it throughout combat. It was important to me that this build not be reliant on any seasonal artifact mods or things that would be going away in a matter of months. So everything you see here should be replicable no matter what season you're playing in. So let's start by jumping into our abilities. For our super, we're running Well of Radiance. Daybreak just doesn't really hold a candle to the utility of Well of Radiance, especially for endgame content. We're going to be using Healing Rift for both us and our allies to benefit from healing. For the melee, we're going with Incinerator Snap for both the crowd control and the Scorching ability. And for our grenade, we're going to go with Healing Nades in order to cure both us and our allies on command, as well as proc Restoration. For our aspects, we're going to be using Touch of Flame to buff our healing grenades even further, and Icarus Dash as it ties in with our exotic of choice for this build. For our fragment, we're going to be using Ember of Torches as a secondary means of becoming radiant, Ember of Solace so that our radiant and restoration effects are increased in duration, Ember of Searing so that defeating scorched targets grants melee energy, and it's not available yet, but Ember of Imperium so that as we're getting solar weapon or ability final blows, the duration of restoration and radiant is extended. For our exotic, we're actually going to be using Rain of Fire, the new Warlock boots. When I first heard of these things, I thought this sounds terrible. But after taking a little bit of time to digest everything this exotic is doing, I realized that there's a lot of potential here. Mainly that final blows with fusion rifles or linear fusion rifles will proc radiant for us. This means we don't need to rely on making sure we have our melee in order to become radiant, and we can more easily proc that effect on command. The second thing that this does is reloads all of our weapons when we use Icarus Dash. This is actually extremely useful given that the Icarus Dash cooldown is only 5 seconds, and it allows us to circumvent long reload animations on our weapons, such as rocket launchers, linear fusions. It also acts as sort of a pseudo auto-loading for all of our weapons at once, which is great for DPS phases. The stats you want to prioritize for this build is of course recovery to make sure we have our healing rift up whenever we need it. Next, you'll want discipline to minimize the cooldown of our healing grenades as much as possible. After that, I recommend speccing into resilience. Remember, with the new changes that have just been implemented, resilience now gives you a damage resistance tied to your resilience stat value. The higher the resilience, the more damage resistance you'll receive. To double down on both healing and damage buffs, we'll be utilizing well mods. We're using Well of Life to give us another source of healing that stacks with restoration, Elemental Time Dilation to extend the duration of that effect, Melee Well Maker to create elemental wells for us to pick up, as well as elemental armaments to also spawn wells when we don't have our melee up. There's room for one more mod, and so we'll be using Font of Might to further buff our damage that way. Font of Might is a 25% damage buff, Radiant is also a 25% damage buff, stacking to a 50% damage increase for solar weapons. Now I know I said I wanted to exclude any artifact mods that might change over the seasons, but I felt this was worth mentioning since we have it. Classy Restoration is an artifact mod available to us this season that goes on your class item. With this mod, casting your Rift will also proc Restoration for us, giving us another means of initiating Restoration when we don't have our healing grenade available. So with all the setup out of the way, let's break down how this build works and synergizes together. When entering combat, the first thing you'll want to do is get a fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle kill to proc radiance. You'll also want to toss your healing grenade or cast your rift if you have the artifact mod to proc restoration. With these both active, Ember of Imperium will kick in whenever you get a solar kill or an ability kill, extending the duration potentially indefinitely, or at least until you stop getting kills. This will give your grenade time to recharge and allow you to save your fusion rifle ammo. Remember, if you run out of fusion rifle ammo, you can use your melee to also proc radiant. By this point, some solar wells should have appeared due to elemental armaments. If they haven't, try to get a melee kill to spawn a solar elemental well. Picking these up will give you healing for 12 seconds, longer if you have multiple copies of Well of Life with Elemental Time Dilation on, and with Font of Might it'll also give that extra 25% damage boost for a total of 50% damage on your solar weapons. Keep in mind non-solar weapons will only be 25% from Radiant. If you suddenly find yourself under a lot of incoming fire, feel free to throw your healing grenade to cure yourself instantly. When you get to DPS phase, remember you can use Icarus Dash to reload all of your weapons. That's essentially all there is to this build. You should be outputting a lot of damage and doing a pretty good job of staying healthy and alive, even under heavy fire. To end, I'll recommend some weapons that I think synergize really well with this build. One of the most important parts of this build is to use a solar primary weapon, as it's necessary to sustain the buffs that you'll be applying to yourself. I think one of the best is the Callus mini tool with the perk Incandescent. If you're unfamiliar with this perk, it's kind of like Volatile Rounds, except it applies Scorch, which will also help you get your melee back because of the fragments we've chosen. That said, there are several weapons with Incandescent that would be really good to pair with this build. The Staccato 46 Scout Rifle and the Strident Whistle Bow are both very strong contenders. I think the Staccato Scout Rifle would be much better in a GM, given that you usually want to play at range. It can also roll shoot to loot, which would be very helpful in making sure you stay topped off on ammo without having to run out in the open and potentially get killed. However, Incandescent isn't mandatory to this build. There are several weapons, particularly exotic ones, that could be really good, just given the crowd control potential. Sunshot comes to mind, Tiku's Divination is also great, Prometheus Lens, and Jotun just got a new catalyst that also lets it apply Scorch. Jotun is also a fusion rifle, so you can use that to proc Radiant as well. Of course, we can't forget about Vex Mythoclast, which is a primary fusion, which would allow you to just constantly proc Radiant without having to think about it at all. But if you do want to use a solar primary energy, you'll need a fusion rifle in some other slot. I've actually really been enjoying the new Stasis fusion rifle Riptide. It's a rapid fire frame and it can roll Vorpal, making it pretty good for single target damage, especially against bosses for a special weapon. However, if you don't have that gun yet, Deliverance from the Vow of the Disciple Raid is also a great alternative, and it's craftable, so you can really choose the perks you want on it. For endgame content, I can't recommend Arbalest enough. Not only does it have intrinsic barrier for stunning champions, it also completely melts any energy shield type. Given that all our other weapons are solar, this could be really good in match game activities. Another one worth mentioning is Bastion. The main appeal of Bastion is its intrinsic ability to stun unstoppable champions. If you need the ability to stun 2 different types of champions all on your own, this could be a really good pick. And for heavy weapons, there are tons to choose from. Honestly, just take your pick. Gallahorn of course comes to mind, but if you don't want to use an exotic, Ascendancy is a good alternative. Running Harmonic Siphon to create orbs with your solar primary would allow you to charge up Explosive Light for even more damage output. Or you can run Cataclysmic, a linear fusion rifle that you can use to proc Radiant, which would essentially allow you to run anything you want for your kinetic and energy slots. And of course there's good old Sleeper Simulant, always a top pick. That pretty much wraps it up for this build video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or concerns or recommendations for how we can improve on this build, please feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.